and he's going to do all the talking.
So I was born in New York in 1968. No,
And what was the name of the hospital?
there's actually going to be, hopefully you're going to do most
Were
of the
you
talking.
born in? Were you born in back there?
I was.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought maybe you were just starting a joke or.
Well, I was. Keith was actually born less than a mile from here, right?
If you were a great right fielder with a rocket for an arm, you could probably hit the Rite Aid from here, which is right across the parking lot from Kaiser.
The birthplace of Keith Morris in 1955. Is that right?
That's right.
I'm terrible at math. That's why we do the book thing. So I have coerced Keith into reading a section from near the beginning where he talks about some early shows that he saw and how that went over with his family, and that's a great launch pad for some of the discussions that we're going to have tonight.
The first big concert I attended was at the Los Angeles Forum in Inglewood. Actually, it was my 15th birthday. I went with my cousin, my next youngest cousin, who was also born on my birthday, and one of my friends who was a twin, and there wasn't enough money to buy enough tickets for everybody to go. There would have been probably 6 or 7 of us. We ended up going to the Forum, and at that time there was a curfew. And being 15 years old, I wasn't old enough to stay out past the curfew, so we walked 2 miles through Inglewood. And luckily at the time, well, first off, we saw Steppenwolf perform Monster, which was pretty amazing. And Three Dog Night, they were good. They had a couple of hits on the radio. And the Grassroots, who also had a couple of hits on the radio. It was all good. I mean, we're young kids. We're just excited to see what was going on and check it out. Being in the Forum, never been in the Forum before. So that was I guess the start of my downhill slide. Yes, it's been 0 for conduct since Steppenwolf performing Monster at the Forum. So now I'm just, is this something that I'm supposed to get used to, just like reading directly from the book?
But we know that you're incapable of that, so let's just proceed with the second paragraph.
Hey, Ben, are you in the crowd? Okay, we're gonna point out the publisher, and yeah, we just thank you.
Ben Chambered, a couple of books right here.
No, and just to advertise a couple of things, we also have a Steve Jones book in the works, and a good friend of mine, a gentleman named Wayne Kramer, is also, I guess Ben is starting his own like LAX, where all the jets are waiting to take off. So I'm supposed to get used to reading from the book. Does Henry Rollins read directly from the book? Because when I grow up, I want to be just like Henry Rollins. I'm going to start lifting weights, and I'm going to start hanging out with Glenn Danzig.
The downfall. It was the downfall.
He memorizes his books. Okay. I was walking across the beach, and I was playing with my navel. I remember that. That was a line out of one of his books. Maybe we'll get around to some more Henry Rollinisms later on. Okay, after that first experience of seeing live music, I was hooked. And I witnessed some unbelievable performances that had lasting impact on me. When I was 17, I saw Iggy and the Stooges on the Raw Power Tool. Raw Power Tool. Yeah, that's another place in the book. That's tour. Yeah. You don't, when you get in a van and you go play night after night, it's not a tool, it's a tour.
And all the
Yeah.
lights are off. And,
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And that was the record that David Bowie produced. A lot of people think, what a horrible job. My argument for how amazing that record is and how cruddy it sounds is that it's a rock record, and who gives a fuck? Because the songs are amazing. With James Williamson standing out in front of the Whiskey A Go-Go at 4:30 in the afternoon on a Sunday, dressed like a vampire, in all of his leather. Like, what are you thinking, man? What it's 98 degrees out. But the show was like insane. What happened was Iggy came down. When you're at the Whiskey A Go-Go, there's stairs to get to the stage. He comes down. He's wearing a pair of pants. That's all he's wearing, just a pair of bell bottoms. That's it. Nothing else. The first thing he does is he walks over to the bucket of the bucket where you're supposed to put the beers in with all of the ice, and all of the ice is completely melted, and he dumps it on himself. And it's like, my God, man, all it takes is for one of these cords to come unplugged from a guitar, and you're gonna get blasted through the roof. But the show was amazing. I mean, this was the first set, and this was at a time when the bands would show up and they would play 2 sets. And they had to, at the end of the set, the guys that were in charge of the stage and the one guitar tech or whoever had to carry him back up the stairs by his arms and his legs. I mean, he was a sponge. It was amazing. Well, that's like that, there's that advertisement before they show the movie where the woman's phone starts ringing and this woman's like doing a vocal thing, and like everybody looks, hey, come on now. Is that you, Perry?
Yes, it is, sir.
Okay.
I can't, brother. I can't.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Okay. We'll let it go. Sorry for pointing you out. Okay. No shirt, no socks, no shoes. And he dumped that bucket of ice cold water on his head. He was standing barefoot on stage with all these live wires running everywhere. All he had to do was grab the mic the wrong way and he would have been blasted through the roof. The band sounded amazing, even though they were just a couple of weeks away from breaking up. You have to understand, when that record came out, one of the greatest rock records to ever be recorded, that record label didn't give a fuck. Sorry, yeah, we're not supposed to talk like that.
No, it's all right. It's my daughter. She's heard it all before.
Okay. Okay. Speaking of Bowie, I saw the Ziggy Stardust tour in 1972 with Mick Ronson, Trevor Bolder, and Mick Woody Woodmansey, a.k.a. the Spiders from Mars. I was in the 7th row with a nugget of hashish in my pocket. Like, primo. Yeah, Germo. An unbelievable show. Just mind-bogglingly genius. Don't take my word for it. There's a live album in that show called Santa Monica 72. Around this time, I also saw the Kinks for the first time at the Hollywood Palladium. And the Davies brothers, who were notoriously famous for getting in fights and all of that stuff, got into a fight, thought it was a one-sided affair. Ray just hauled off and sucker punched Dave and knocked him down. Dave kept playing his guitar until a pair of roadies came out to lift him up. Dave just shrugged it off like all he wanted to do was lie there in his misery and play guitar. Ray had some kind of breakdown not too long after the show. Now, the scene at the Hollywood Palladium on that stage, there's a little episode in Spinal Tap where the roadies try to come to the bass player's rescue. and it just turns into this comedy of errors. And that's pretty much what it was. I mean, I was just blown away. I believe this was the Muswell Hillbillies tour. My friends and I loved to see live music, but couldn't always afford to go, so I got really good at sneaking into places. That one advantage to being short, I was able to sneak into places I didn't belong. One night I snuck into the dressing room at the Starwood when the Runaways were doing a photo shoot with Led Zeppelin. I was able to sneak past the guy at the door and finagle my way in. However, my first brush with rock and roll superstardom didn't work out so well. In fact, it ended pretty abruptly when Kim Fowley, one of the most hated men in the music business, spotted me. "Get him out of here," he shouted. A bouncer picked me up off my feet, threw me against the wall. When I slumped to the ground, he grabbed me by the neck, lifted me up by my belt loop, and tossed me out the door like a piece of garbage. I was a little groggy from my crash landing and all the beer I'd been drinking that day, but when I lifted my head up, there was a hand reaching down to help me up. I grabbed the hand, got to my feet, and found myself standing in front of a man with long blonde hair and platform shoes, dressed in some outrageous glam costume. I recognized him immediately, Arthur Killer Kane of the New York Dolls. "I hate that motherfucking Kim Fowley, that motherfucker," he growled. Killer Kane made a big impression on me. Here he was, a bona fide rock star, but he wasn't too big to lend a helping hand to a scrawny kid. Although the lesson to be learned from the whole experience was, obviously, don't fuck around in someone else's dressing room. That episode planted a seed with respect to how to be a decent human being. If I ever got famous, I wouldn't be like Kim Fowley and step on people just because I could. I'd be like Arthur Killer Kane. Oh, I like this part. This is about the Hollywood Bowl. We had a situation where we had discovered a way to be able to get into the Hollywood Bowl for free without having to come back down over the hills through all of the bushes and the trees, where at that time the security people were called West Security, I believe it was. They would wear UCLA Bruin colors, yellow jackets with blue lettering, and they would get up in the trees, and their favorite thing was to carry pipes around with them and brass knuckles. And when people would come over the hills to see a show for free at the Hollywood Bowl, they would end up being hospitalized. But we had figured out a way to, there's a ticket booth when you first start to walk in, before you enter the Hollywood Bowl, where you would go to get your tickets. Next to the ticket booth was a little drainage ditch, and the fence ran right up above the ground level. So there was this hole that was perfect for me. I'm just right in there. My friends, it was a little bit difficult for them, but the great thing was it would let you into the first 20 rows at the Hollywood Bowl in the bushes. So if you wanted to sit in the bushes, you could watch the show from maybe from here to across the street. And we saw some really amazing shows. Over the course of about 3 or 4 summers, we saw the Allman Brothers. We saw Procol Harum and Pink Floyd. And unfortunately, we saw Seals and Crofts and Kenny Loggins and Messina. We did see, and this isn't very punk rock and not very cool amongst that group of people, the Grateful Dead. And this was actually, I'm very fortunate to have seen the Grateful Dead twice. I'm not a big fan, but I do own these 2 records, and these were the 2 tours that I saw the Grateful Dead on. American Beauty and Working Man's Dead. And many of the Grateful Dead fanatics will say those are possibly their 2 best albums. So I feel fortunate to have been able to see them on those tours. Now, the first time I saw the Grateful Dead was at the Hollywood Palladium, and that's the first time I ever experienced the Hollywood Palladium, and that was also the first time I ever experienced elephant tranquilizer mixed with just cheap red wine, the cheapest headache for 6 weeks red wine. And I stood in the middle of the floor at the Hollywood Palladium for about 6 hours. I did not move. And right around the end of the 6th hour, I decided that I had to go to the bathroom and that I wanted to just walk around and see what the rest of the Hollywood Palladium looked like. And upstairs, this was when the Grateful Dead would do one of their 4 to 5 hour long marathons. So the people that I went with were the hippies that lived 4 houses down, four doors down from where I lived, and they were the ones that turned me on to the Boda bag with the wine and elephant tranquilizer. We had a friend that worked up here at the L.A. Zoo that was swiping drugs that he would sell to us, and it looked like cocaine or crystal meth or something like that, and it was pretty exciting, actually.
If you like that story, there are no less than 6 chapters about the Grateful Dead in my damn. So, no, I'm just
because they're my favorite.
How about these last 2, and then we'll.
Okay. When I had, this is one of his favorite stories, and I was talking with Wayne Kramer a couple of days ago on the phone because Ben's got a Wayne Kramer book in the works with Jim.
No.
You're not going to work on that.
No.
I thought you were going to work on that.
Not that I know about.
Maybe in the works. Because Wayne read the book and said, I'm working with Ben and Jim. And I said, you're not going to work with a couple of greater guys, so be prepared. I'm sorry that I pulled the rug out, or, so be prepared.
Can I have Wayne's number after the show?
I could give you his email address.
You read out these last 2.
Okay. But getting back to Wayne Kramer, I said there was an acknowledgement. I rattle off a list of ex-girlfriends, and one of them happened to, he said, you can't put this in the book because it makes you look sexist. It makes you look like a fucking chauvinist pig. And I don't really care about being correct anymore. I'm 61 years old and I could just really give a fuck. But I'll try to be as good as I can. That's the rule. Just be good. Okay, so getting back to Wayne Kramer and this part that I allowed Jim to, because he's such a great guy and he said so many great things. I said, Jim, if you don't want to put it in the book, don't put it in the book. I'm not going to argue with you anymore.
I think that's like the only thing we disagreed about was like some crappy line in the acknowledgement section.
That and there's a story where I use the word nigger, which makes me look like a racist.
Well, that's in the book.
And no, that's in the book. And that actually saved my life.
So.
In a bus full of gang members. Oh, you must be crazy. We're not going to mess with you. So I tell Wayne the story about how I acknowledge all of my ex-girlfriends, and one of them happened to turn my dad on to the fact that I'm going to read this story, and then I'll tell you about the girlfriend. Okay. When I was a teenager, I had posters of all my favorite musicians on my bedroom walls. David Bowie, Mark Bolan, Edgar Winters. They only come out at night. See, if you remember that album cover, he looks very feminine because he allowed his girlfriend to put makeup on him for the album shoot. Okay, and the first Kiss album. Okay. Got to have a Kiss album poster on the wall, otherwise you don't count, I guess. My dad didn't really know what to make of it. One time he came into my room while I was listening to music and looked at all the posters and said, You're a fag, aren't you? That was one of our many lopsided conversations, an actual one-sided conversation. I think it was hard for him because he liked music too, but jazz was his genre of choice. To him it was this exciting creative thing, and he just didn't understand the appeal of these strange-looking, gender-bending rock stars. To him, they were all a bunch of queers. It wasn't just the way the bands looked. He had a genuine dislike for the music. The harder the music, the more he disliked it. One afternoon I was listening to Sham 69. He came into my room and said, "I'm going to a jazz festival today and they won't be playing any of this shit." Okay, Dad, you do your thing, I'll do mine. Getting back to the part that Jim trimmed, the friend happened to decide that she was going to sleep downstairs one night and decided that she was going to sleep in the nude in the middle of summertime. So when you live at the beach, it's like 90 degrees out. So not only did she sleep in the nude, but she didn't even bother to cover herself in any of the blankets. And she's laying there. My dad comes down at about 6 a.m. to take a shower, and there she is. And he said, "You know what? I don't think you're a fag."
I had a similar situation with my dad, except the band in question was the Village People. And I had a poster on the wall, and being like a kid, I didn't really understand that the Village People was there were some coded references there that were about 9 miles.
Had you
over
even
my
bothered
head.
to listen to their music?
No, I liked the music.
Okay.
Have you listened to their first album? Have you, Keith? Okay then, someone's got some homework to do.
Yeah, several dozen times.
So we also want to talk about tonight some of our heroes who get referenced quite a bit in this book, and I think there's no better place to start than with Brendan Mullen, who I think is the most important person in the L.A. punk scene, if not one of the most.
Well, we could point the finger at him and say that he's responsible, because he did open the clubhouse where everybody hung out and all of the bands would come and play.
Right. I mean, and it may not have. I mean, he was a musician, but like that impact came a lot later. But Brendan played an important role. Just you and Brendan, their careers kept intersecting many times. Everybody knows who Brendan Mullen is, right?
Anybody that doesn't know who Brendan Mullen is, that's okay. I mean, we can't absorb all of it. Brendan was my friend. He ran a place called The Mask, which during the day was a place where the bands would gather to rehearse. And it was under the Pussycat Theater up here on Hollywood Boulevard, right in the epicenter, right in the middle of Hollywood. And the space basically was a bomb shelter. It was indestructible. All sorts of graffiti. I remember seeing just some of the greatest shows that I've ever seen, like the Weirdos and Dickies, the Germs, and the crowd was always actually a good mix of people. And the scene, the early LA punk scene was very cliquish. It was like, well, it belongs to us, and we know each other, and well, you're from the Valley, and you don't really look like you belong here, and our thing was black. When I say our thing, at that time, I was a member of Black Flag, and we all looked like roadies for Peter Frampton, and I kept saying the Grateful Dead like we just got stoned and fell out of the Volkswagen van in the parking lot at the Hollywood Bowl. So we didn't fit in, but eventually we had a night where we were welcomed wholeheartedly, and that is we were up here on Fountain, over past La Brea, at a after-hours party, somebody's space. They're playing different music, local bands, all sorts of stuff. And there was a break in the music, and one of the guys from Black Flag had a copy of the Nervous Breakdown EP, and we put it on the turntable and played it, and the people just kind of stepped back like, what is this? And then once the music was done, they looked at us and said, you guys didn't make that. And this was a very pivotal and important turning point for us, because the people in the room were people like Fast Freddy, Don Waller, Chris Desjardins, Claude Kickboy Bessie. And from that point on, we were all it was one big party. Brendan also happened to be there. I had not a run-in, but a friendly thing happen with him up in San Francisco. He had traveled up there to play with Geza X and the Mommy Men. And Black Flag was playing with them. This was at the Mabuhay Gardens, and we got there early, and they did their sound check, and he was really bummed out because he had his fill of them on the ride up from Hollywood and wanted to get away from them. And Chuck Dukowski said, look, I'm going to drive around. Let's go get something to eat. We got to find a place to park. We've already unloaded our equipment. Let's go. Brendan said, can I come along with you? And Brendan and I are sitting in the back of the van. And at one point, Brendan looks at me and he said, you guys are my favorite band. You guys are my favorite punk rock band. You're the best band in Los Angeles. And I was taken aback because he'd been responsible for the clubhouse where all of the great Hollywood bands, bands from Chula Vista, Dills, and the Zeros, and the Avengers, and the San Francisco bands, Dead Kennedys. He'd been responsible for them having a place to come to when they came to Los Angeles. And for him to sit there and tell me that, I'm just like, I don't know how to take it. I'm just, normally when somebody pays you a compliment, you're like, well, thank you. Thank you, that's very nice of you. And I was speechless. And from that point on, Brendan and I became really good friends. Whether it be hanging out at the Club Lingerie, whether it be the Variety Art Center downtown. And one night, and I'm going to blame this book not on Jim or Ben, but on Brendan. I ran into Brendan down in West L.A. at an art exhibit. And we're out on the sidewalk and we're both animated. We're just like, dude, how you doing? Where have you been? What's going on? And this goes on for about 15 minutes. And, then I start saying, well, I started to write some stories. And he said, well, you need to do that. You need to write a book. I'm going to help you get a book deal. And he said, give me a call. Call me in a few days. And I called him and he said, why don't you give me a call on Monday? This was on a Thursday. He was leaving Friday night. That Friday night up in Santa Barbara, he fell out of his chair. And he'd suffered a massive stroke. And Monday morning, they pulled the life support. And I, being the asshole that I am, the first thought that crossed my mind was, well, there goes my book, which is that's not the right thing to be thinking when you lose a friend, a really good friend like that. And it dawned on me a couple of hours later that it's not about the book. It's about losing a really good friend.
Yeah, actually, the first time that you and I met, Keith, was in 2002. I run a reading series here in LA called Vermin on the Mount, and I've been doing that for 12 years. And I think what gave me the confidence to do that was this show that I put on at Track 16 Gallery in Santa Monica, and it was on the 25th anniversary of the Damned's arrival in LA in the spring of 1977, the first LA punk band to play, first English punk band to play in LA. And there was a whole bunch of people who came down to do some amazing things. And Brendan and Keith read from We Got the Neutron Bomb.
And the way that it happened was Brendan looked at me and he said, we're just going to read down the pages.
And if you don't know, We Got the Neutron Bomb is an oral history, so it's many voices. It's a great book. You should pick it up.
So I got to be Alice Bagg, Mike Watt. I think Brendan tried to pull off his best Darby Crash, maybe a Pat Smear or a Don Bowles. I think I got to be Lorna Doom. That covers all of the germs. Maybe X-Zine, I got to, or John Doe. But the way that it reads is it's just a quote from each one of these people. All of these different players, all of these different people from all of these different bands.
And it tells the whole story that way. But I had the great fortune to interview Brendan. It was just going to be a short interview, but he was such a generous, gregarious guy that he talked to me for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And the interview's still up somewhere online if you wanted to check it out. But it was a total education on what the early LA punk rock scene was. He was a super generous guy. So he's kind of the spirit behind this book. Another person that you're going to encounter over and over again in the pages of My Damage is Jeffrey Lee Pierce. And your friendship with Jeffrey goes back to, I think, Chinatown, right?
Well, we were cigarette bros and beer bros, and take a bump of this and take a little bap of that. And his thing was that he really loved the South Bay bands, which would be The Last. He actually at one point sang with them. I read it in the Jungle Book. He was also a big fan of the Alley Cats. He loved Black Flag. He loved Red Cross. He loved the Circle Jerks. I don't know what else to say.
There's maybe we shouldn't say too much because there are some great stories that came out of when he was briefly your roommate down in
Inglewood.
Inglewood in Imperial Village. Is that what it was? Imperial Village?
Well, we had this amazing party take place. I want to say at Bourbon Day, one of the inner city high schools. Every year would do this big bash, and all of a sudden we're at this high school in the gymnasium, and Clifton Chenier is playing. Now, there's no room for accordion in rock music, but when Clifton Chenier plays the accordion, he means business, and that actually counts. So here we are at this party, the Alvin brothers and Buster Bateman, all of the guys from the Blasters, all of the guys from the Flesh Eaters, John and X-Zine. There's just this whole group of white people in this room down in central LA. And it was pretty amazing. I mean, they had this drink they call it the bucket. It's all ice and Cutty Sark, I think was what they dumped on it. Like half a bottle of Cutty Sark, for like $3. That's like the best drink special you're ever gonna get anywhere. So the party spilled back over to the Pink House in Inglewood, and I was very fortunate at the time because the people that surrounded me in the neighborhood were all like middle class African American, like a police officer and a mailman, people like that. And they were excited that there was all of this commotion and The gang thing would only start a couple of years later. So,
And your grandparents lived down the street. So
yeah, my
you kinda-
grandparents lived down the street.
So you grew up in that environment. Jeffrey Lee Pierce you also wrote a song about Jeffrey Lee Pierce for Off. And it's one of my favorite Off songs, actually. It's really pretty unforgettable. Now, the book officially comes out on the 30th, but it already has some critics. So one of them, in a review,
Yay
complained.
or nay?
It was yay, but they were disappointed that the book doesn't talk about your dreadlocks. And we talked about this
Boo-hoo.
because I was like, well, yeah, I never asked you about your dreadlocks. So I thought I'd ask you now. What's up with the dreads, Keith?
Well, I was recently accosted by 6 young guys on the street in Germany who wanted to pummel me because I didn't have a lighter. I didn't have a cigarette lighter.
They're like, how can you have those dreads
And
and not have a lighter?
recently I was asked where's the good pot, man? It's like people look at me and assume that not only do I have rolling papers,
You're carrying
but
a kilo in your hat.
I'm dealing pot, yeah. But it's always about the lighter, the Bic.
But you don't. That's how you
Flip
keep
your
your
bit.
youthful appearance.
Well, I'm just lazy, just a lazy white guy.
All right. So,
Not feeling irie, no. Not even close.
okay, so one of the things that maybe you picked up on just from all the different bands that Keith has brought up in this short time together is in the stories that he would tell me and he would write down, I had to do a lot of homework. I would listen to bands like, I had no idea who Procol Harum was, for example, and other bands I'd heard about, but I'd never listened to. So reading the book is kind of like, will either be a walk down memory lane or give you some kind of education. But Keith is, despite all his 40 years on every side of music you can imagine, from being an outsider band trying to get noticed, from playing on big stages to even working at a major label, still have like a real passion for what's new and what's coming out and what people are doing with music.
I went through a period where I could not listen to another punk rock band. And that lasted maybe 6 months. And I decided that's pretty narrow-minded. I mean, with all music, there'll always be, and this was explained to me by David Anderley, who, R.I.P., was one of the main guys in charge of A&M Records. When the Circle Jerks signed with Faulty Products, David Anderley was going to produce our record, and it was like, wow, this doesn't happen every day. This is the guy, it's like Herb Albert and Jerry Moss and David Anderley, the third guy in the thread there. And he said that you have this, it's like the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg. The best stuff is on the tip of the iceberg, even though you don't know what's at the bottom. But it's, the best always rises to the top. And I looked at that and I said, I'm being bombarded by all of these really mediocre bands, and there's a ton of them. And I'm not going to start naming any of them. You can go out and you can discover them for yourselves. But the situation with me not listening to punk rock was I was burned out. And I very rarely get burned out. But one of my things is that I've always been open-minded when it comes to music. So now I'm listening to jazz. I mean, I still couldn't tell you John Coltrane from Ornette Coleman, but I'm listening to it and I'm making an attempt to go to that part of the world. You know, and I guess that would be my dad coming out in me. I don't want to be like my parents. Fuck that shit. And I'm understanding that there are other great things out there, you know, other great forms of music.
So how about we open up to some questions from the audience? Do you have any questions about My Damage or for Keith? Yes, in the back.
My dad passed away before I could say Return to Forever or the Mahavishnu Orchestra. No, and he actually appreciated that kind of music.
We had his shop is right across the street from the lighthouse.
Well, my dad had a store down on Pier Avenue in Hermosa Beach that I started working at when I was 8 years old. And right directly across the street was Howard Rumsey's Lighthouse, which is for the West Coast. If you're a traveling jazz musician or you're any kind of a jazz musician, you would have ended up playing there. And my dad's favorite story was that he bugged Elvin Jones, who is, when you talk about in that musical world, you're talking about the guy that's possibly the greatest jazz drummer. I mean, there's a bunch of them, but Elvin Jones is, he's way up there. And my old man bugged him to the point where he said, "Sit on my kid, sit on my kid." That was my dad's favorite story. And I wasn't having any of that. It's like, Elvin who?
The question, Eric?
Yeah, to knowing your writing and knowing your voice, and then today while I was waiting, reading 10 or so pages of the book, hearing Keith talk, hearing his voice in the book, how did you guys kind of blend that and create this autobiography?
Well, I told him it's all about me and it has nothing to do with any of his writing.
True.
I cracked the whip.
That's the way it should be. You know, like when you're co-authoring a book with someone telling their story, like my voices should be invisible.
Yeah, it's coming through.
And on that note,
But we do have some of my books for sale. Yes.
I have just one opinion. Black Flag has kind of turned into this idea that, not only were they just making crazy music at the time, but they kind of evolved into, wow, they did something that's artistic. It's almost like across the realm of into the art world. What's your opinion, especially using someone like Evan Pettibone that kind of grew with you guys and started his career, and kind of how you guys have managed to cross those two with music and art, and kind of where you guys both kind of ended up? What's your idea with the whole art world, and how do you feel?
well, to start with, we didn't know what we were doing. Raymond knew what he was doing. And we can blame Raymond for the 4 bars and the name Black Flag. And we just went through this lawsuit where things got really ugly, things got expensive, and I really, I can't say enough great things about Raymond. I can't. I don't even know where to start. As for the music and the art, sometimes when you're doing it, when you're making it, you're not realizing what you're doing. Well, how do you feel about being an innovator? How do you feel about creating a genre of music? It's like, I don't know, how am I supposed to feel? We didn't know what we were doing. We were just doing it. We didn't know any better. As for the artistic thing, if you want to call it art, great. If you don't want to call it art, if you want to call it noise, great. Call it whatever you want to call it. I can't get into any kind of thing about, well, it's this or it's that, or intellectually on a mental level, it's this, and we were trying to do that. It was like we weren't trying to do anything but just make noise. We were like angry and frustrated and depressed, and all of this stuff was taking place, and people didn't like us, and all the people in our community wanted to kill us, and the police wanted to run us out of town, and it's like, we're just running. We're trying to have a good time. We're hanging with our friends. We have the opportunity to play occasionally. You know, just take advantage of all of it and just go with it. But I can't say enough great things about Raymond.
And Raymond did the cover of My Damage. So everyone will get to take a piece of Raymond ahead of it home tonight.
Can you talk a little bit about Repo Man and then what
Yes.
more circle jerks and instead of beatouts?
Question was, can you talk about Repo Man, the best movie ever made?
No, I thought he was directing that question to you. Another one of these take advantages of a situation that's presented to you, an opportunity. In this world, if there's an opportunity, you look at it and you go, yeah, let's do this. What do we have to lose? If we don't do it, some other group of schlubs will take advantage of it and, you know, go with it wherever it goes. We were invited by Alex Cox because he loved the band. It wasn't some music coordinator or somebody in the background that was putting together a soundtrack. He actually had come to some of our shows, and our situation was that we were invited to be there at 10 a.m. in the morning to be suited for our tuxedos. And we are suited for these custom tuxedos and told that, oh no, you can't take them off. And of course it's the middle of summer. It's about 95 degrees out. And the trailer, the room in the trailer, happened to be the one where the air conditioning wasn't working. Now, we were promised a couple of cases of beer because there was no money. We weren't going to get paid. So it's like, well, hey, you know, we can be in a movie for a couple of cases of beer. But at breakfast time, we were demanding beer, and it was, oh no, you can't give these guys beer. We were hungover from the night before, hanging out with the Coke dealer. So we're trapped in these suits until about, I think it was like 2:30 in the morning. And we just wanted to do it and get out of there and maybe go back over to the Coke dealer's house and grab our couple of cases of beer. The movie did for us the same thing that the decline of Western civilization did for us. See, we're in a period where there's no internet. If you want to talk to somebody, you talk to them on the phone, or you write a letter and you mail them a letter or a postcard. And all of a sudden, here are these films that are being presented in other places in the world, and people get to see, well, that's what it's like in Los Angeles? Oh, when is Los Angeles coming here? The great thing for the decline, we were offered a tour on the East Coast, just out of the blue, you know, after the film hit the East Coast. And we ended up meeting people like Harley Flanagan, who would later, he was the 12-year-old drummer or the 11-year-old drummer in the Stimulators, who would later go on to start a band called the Cro-Mags. we would meet all the guys from Minor Threat. We would meet all of the Necros. It was actually a really great experience, except for the about 2 or 3 nights before we were supposed to leave, our drummer decided to get in a fight with a guy who had stole his girlfriend's Volkswagen. And he breaks all of his knuckles on one hand and a couple of knuckles on his other hand. And oh, I can't play drums. And we're like, well, we're gonna go. And our friend Charlo from the Plugs volunteered. We rehearsed once, and off we went, and it was a great experience. As for Repo Man, same thing. Only looking at the way we perform in the movie, we're not showing up to entertain moms and dads. We're there's a really great story about that particular song and that particular lineup of the band, and one of the guys is right here. Let us introduce Mark Earl Liberty Vidal. No, we were presented the opportunity to record. We recorded one song. We have one of the greatest rock drummers of all time, a guy named Chuck Biscuits.
Now,
And he ends up playing acoustic guitar to a one of the guys would call it the Himafachi machine that goes. So he doesn't even play drums on the track.
if it's been a while since you've seen Repo Man, the Circle Jerks are the lounge band in a bar scene. It's not really a show. There's no punk involved. It's kind of they take the song and turn it into a lounge act when the shit hits
It's
the
the
fan.
future of punk.
Right. You were doing acoustic folk punk like 20 years or 40 years earlier. So it's that scene that we're talking about. And so the lineup was Earl, Chuck,
Greg and myself.
and it's the only song recorded, right, in that lineup.
Yes.
I mean, there's some videos of you guys playing, but that's never did a record with that lineup.
Sad. Tragic. I'm gonna go upstairs and slit my wrists.
Any more questions?
One more, how about?
One more? Okay. Better be good, no pressure. One more in the back. Yeah.
No, but I'm just interested in the text. Like, I don't know how you wrote it, but he has one of those voices that you recognize immediately when he speaks. I'm just wondering how that, like, to translate that into text. I don't know how you go about it, but there were like struggles or how that process.
So I couldn't hear all of it, but like the saying the writing style.
Yeah, I mean, just talks in a specific way that we recognize and how to get that into.
Well, it's like for a while I lived down in the South Bay. I lived in Manhattan Beach, and I lived in Playa del Rey, which maybe doesn't count, but I knew plenty of like wasted burnouts down there. So I kind of like, I kind of had a template for the voice.
Well, you're asking how he was able to
Get it into writing, what it
get my voice onto the page. And a lot of people that know me, that have read the book, because we did give out some advance copies, said that Jim did an amazing job in capturing that. Now, I don't know, this would be the reason why I wasn't allowed to write the book.
But you did write quite a bit.
Well, I had written several stories that I presented at the very beginning, and Jim read some of them and pulled pieces. My thing is that I'll talk in circles. And he didn't allow that to happen. He trimmed the fat. See, I'm in a band called Off right now, and one of our favorite things is that we just get right to it and skip all of the BS, and there's not going to be a long intro. There will be no 2-minute guitar solo. Trim the fat, get in, and get out.
And that's the approach that we took. We wanted the chapters to be short, like a hardcore song. I mean, you don't want 35 pages of Keith's boyhood, to start the. I mean, that's just not.
Well, I was born.
It's just not what you would expect or what you would want, and so we wanted to keep it truer to.
And if you did want that, you're not going to get it.
Well, I guess that could be our final question. Is there going to be a sequel, Keith?
Well, I could tell the story about being trapped on the back of a motorcycle in New Orleans and ending up in the suite completely naked with a used condom in a room full of guys who have watched whatever happened with this biker chick. I could tell that story. That could be the first story.
Amazing. I feel damaged already. Thank you guys very much. You've been an awesome audience. I would like to say two things. I want to thank my wife and my daughter Annie, who were, gave me a lot of support, and I had to listen to a lot of punk rock through this. And my daughter, who plays the flute and the trumpet, does not like punk rock.
And she actually inquired as to what episodes of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles I do a voice where I fight Raphael.
Yeah,
Roth.
yeah, if you're a fan of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you'll hear Keith's voice come out of what do you put, Reptilius?
I'm Reptilicus, yes.
Reptilicus. Yeah. I can see why they cast you.
And we become friends. I become friends with Raphael.
But I also wanted to thank you, Keith. I had a lot of respect for you when we started this project, and I have.
And now you have less. Okay, I understand. It's not that big of a deal. I'm not going to be offended or hurt in the least bit.
Keith's joking around, but I have an enormous amount of respect for Keith's integrity and his work ethic. And when we started this project, he was committed from day one, never wavered. And I think it really shows in the book. It's just really committed from page one to the last. And we're both really proud of it. I hope you enjoy it.
And we want to apologize to Ben. Not we, but I, for blowing the deal about Wayne Kramer. Be prepared.
Thank you. So everybody buy at least 2 copies, because you're going to want to send one to your friends.
Yeah, you're going to want one for your left hand and one for your right hand. Okay.
And then we'll sign some books for you.
How did we do it?